the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everyone. Happy June, everyone. First weekend of June. Yesterday, we featured a conversation with my old friend Keith Teare, Silicon Valley entrepreneur, visionary, who was bemoaning the absence of utopians. He was talking about a new piece by another technologist, Rohit Krishnan, called Wither Utopia. And Keith argued that we need bigger thinkers. We need people to think dramatically and radically about how technology can make the future a better place. So, Keith, if you're watching, I found a hardcore utopian, Rob Wolcott. He's the co-founder and chairman of Twin Global and the co-author of an intriguing new book called Proximity: How Coming Breakthroughs in Just-in-Time Transform Business, Society, and Daily Life. And just to underline what he may or may not agree are his utopian qualities or thinking, he says in the book, what if you could have whatever you want produced and provided immediately and affordably, no matter how customized, with minimal environmental impact, products, services, and experience on demand? And just on demand, we have Rob for you, talking to us from New Jersey. Rob, are you utopian? Is that a term that you like, you're comfortable with?
Well, I love the English language in general. I actually am optimistic. I think to be an entrepreneur and investor, you have to be to some extent. But I'm actually more of a fan of dystopia, dystopic literature, not dystopias. Obviously, who wants to do that? But I think the more that we can dig into dystopic ideas in literature, the better we can prepare for creating a utopia or a great future. Last point about that, Andrew, I find in history, anyone who tries aggressively to create a utopia actually ends up creating a dystopia. So you often talk about balance. I'm going to 100% agree with you about that.
Yeah, and of course, the word utopia was invented by the 16th century thinker, martyr, Christian Catholic martyr, Thomas More. It means in Latin a no place, and it's hard to know if he really imagined it or whether the book Utopia was a dystopian critique of utopian thinking. What are your favorite dystopian books? Mine is Brave New World, the early 20th century book, warning us about a technocentric future, a techno-heavy future in which humanity had been extinguished. Do you like Brave New World, Rob?
Well, I have it right back there. I can go get it if you want to take a look. I have a love for Brave New World and 1984 as a dyad. And in the book, Proximity, we actually share the story. You probably have seen it, Andrew, the story of George Orwell sending the manuscript of 1984 to his French tutor, who was, of course, Aldous Huxley. And Huxley wrote back to Orwell saying, George, this is undoubtedly a masterpiece, but I happen to think that my dystopic vision of the future is more likely to happen. This, rather than the boot on the head of oppression, the constant monitoring of oppression, instead, the free availability of sensory experience, the requirement to take a pill if you feel anything but fleeting happiness. And I think if we take Huxley and Orwell as a dyad, we have a better set of guardrails to think about where we're heading in the not distant future.
And of course, as you know, Huxley was Orwell's tutor at Eton, and 1984 was Orwell's last book as he was dying. He was looking for a publisher. I'm guessing, Rob, in your world, in the world of Proximity, he would have self-published and he would have written this thing and he would have put it out online in a just-in-time time kind of way. Is that fair?
He could have, but there's no way to know exactly. Kai-Han Krippendorf, my co-author, and I could have done that with proximity, but for a variety of reasons, we still decided to go with a traditional publisher.
Yeah, you got it with
Columbia University Press. Yeah.
So tell me, outline the vision in this. How are these coming breakthroughs in just-in-time technology going to transform business, society, and daily life, Rob? And what kind of time frame? Are we talking about the next 25 years, the next 75 years, the next year?
Great. Well, Andrew, some of it's already happening. In fact, a lot of it's already happened. But this is, proximity defines what's different about digital from the industrial age. Proximity defines sort of the dominant logic, the internal logic of digital. What do I mean by that? Well, all kinds of digital technology. So whether it's AI or mobile apps or 3D printing, for instance, rooftop solar is digitally enabled. Anything that's digitally enabled. They allow us to compress capabilities in smaller and smaller packages and distribute them all over the economy ever closer to each moment in time and space. And so therefore, digital pushes the production and provision of value, product, services, experiences, ever closer to the moment of actual demand in time and space. And we don't just mean a little better supply chain management. That's a great thing. But over the long run, we literally mean setting up business models, technology platforms to encourage us to procrastinate, to wait as long as possible until we produce or provide a product, service, or experience, until you have an actual customer ready to pay. And there are examples that are already there, like Netflix. I mean, if you go on Netflix, you can watch anything, anytime, anywhere. Digital content is easy to do that with because it travels at the speed of light. But this stuff, proximity, is coming for physical products as well. And it's moving at different paces in terms of the production as opposed to the provision, service, distribution, support, et cetera. But that is the dominant direction across all industries. And we make the case in the book by looking across a whole bunch of different realms of life, as we call them: how we eat, how we power, how we work, et cetera.
Thinking about, I mean, one of the things you talk about in the book is renewable energy, solar panels. Yeah. We just had some solar panels installed, if that's the right word, in San Francisco. It was a huge pain in the neck. The people, I don't want to name names, but they were really inefficient. It took months. It was very aggravating. We got into all sorts of fights about price and when they were going to set it up and when they were going to switch it on. How will your proximity revolution change that? Because you're still going to need large physical panels that you have to put on somebody's roof. You're still going to need a firm to put it in and price it. You're still going to have all the aggravation associated with high cost goods. What difference will digital technology play in all that?
Well, let me start by asking, by the way, great you added the solar. Second, the other headaches, I'm not sure how much they have to do with digital. It's just kind of doing business. But I'll start by asking this question, Andrew. How much electricity had you generated on your roof before you installed the solar panels?
No, and in the long run, it was worth it. I mean, not even in the long run, in the relatively short term, we went from having monthly bills of several $100s to bills of essentially zero. So I'm not arguing that one shouldn't put solar panels on one's roof. I think that's a good thing. But I'm just not entirely sure how that's connected with your proximity revolution. I mean, you still need people, you still need physical products, you still need large vehicles to schlep these solar panels around.
I see the nature of your question. Well, all that stuff doesn't necessarily go away. What we're not arguing in proximity is that within the short term, we won't have trucks, we won't have people. We're not arguing anything like that. Instead, what we're arguing is digital of all sorts allows us to place capabilities where they've never been before in smaller and smaller packages. And therefore, the economics start to change in terms of what makes a lot of sense. Now, in case of distributed energy resources and the panels on your roof, I'm assuming they're on the roof of your home. The panels on the roof of your home are an example of DERs, distributed energy resources. And in the chapter, How We Power, we give the example. It allows us to do things we've never been able to do before. So you can look at virtual power plants where digital systems are tracking where all electricity is being generated across an economy or a grid, and then optimizing where the energy flows based on the changing needs. But we can also, Andrew, look at the policy level. What we find when we look back in history is often people are solving the wrong problems. They're facing the wrong challenges. And so I'll give you an example we use in the How We Power chapter, and that's the country of Bangladesh. So as a lot of people know, Bangladesh has had electricity provision challenges for decades. And about 13 or 14 years ago, the government said by the year 2023, we are going to have enough electricity generation in the country to serve the whole country and our growth. Now, that's a big objective. And guess what? They did it ahead of schedule. By 2022, they had enough power generation in Bangladesh to serve the whole country. The problem was it didn't work. Why is that? Well, because they built a bunch of large traditional, very good, but traditional hydrocarbon powered generation plants. Centralized at a distance, you need the grid capabilities. And by the way, they all ran on hydrocarbons, and Bangladesh doesn't have a lot of developed hydrocarbons. So they're at the mercy of global energy markets. When the Russia-Ukraine war started, that wasn't good for them. Meanwhile, though, Andrew, not because the government was pushing it, but because people needed it, solar arrays started popping up in communities that were not connected to the grid, or on people's homes, or in industrial parks. And it's still a small sliver of the power picture in Bangladesh. But those communities, families, businesses that have those are less susceptible to the power outages and the challenges of the overall grid. So the punchline really is, what if the government of Bangladesh had posed a different challenge 14 years ago? What if instead of saying we need enough power generation in the country, which they have, it just doesn't get to where people need it. What if they had posed the challenge, by the year 2023, we aspire to have electricity where and when people need it all the time? That would have generated a very different solution, what we call a hybrid model. Some centralized production, we still need some of that, the base load, but then distributed energy resources like the solar panels on your roof.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's going to argue with you on renewable energy. I think it's hard to argue on that front. But some of the other technologies you write about in the book, Rob, are ones that I've never really been completely convinced with. We've heard about 3D printing now for 20 or 30 years. It's hard to see any evidence that the 3D printing revolution is happening. I'm sure you might disagree. You also talk about virtual reality. Mark Zuckerberg took a huge bet on VR in Facebook, and then kind of wrote off his losses and seems to be embracing AI. We'll talk about AI later, but are there some technologies like VR and 3D printing that might not make it in this new world that you're describing?
In one sense, yes. In another sense, no. So let's back up to the dot-com boom of 1998 to 2000 or so. You, like me, probably remember a lot of people who were looking at Amazon, and they were the new upstart. And they would say, sure, you can buy books online because you know what you're getting. You can buy CDs online. You remember CDs, and you know what's going to come, right? But
yeah, I had a startup in the 90s called Audio Cafe, so I was all too bound up with that revolution.
There you go. I'm like yourself. I had a startup too. I was in my doctoral program at the engineering school at Northwestern at the time. And I was a co-founder of a startup that when the crash hit, I lost more money on paper than I'd ever made in my entire life.
Me too.
It was a good time to do that. But my point was, at the time, people would look at Amazon and say, look, you can buy books online, but no one's ever going to buy shoes online. And what happened later? Somebody figured out the model, Zappos. And so now the world is different. The same thing's happening with 3D printing, will happen with virtual reality. Look, I think we owe a debt to Mark Zuckerberg for blowing $4.5 billion of his investors' money and his own money to go big on VR too early. He was simply too early.
But Rob, is that really an argument? You can make that about anything. You can say, well, everyone's always written stuff off and then it comes back. Some technologies just don't explode. I mean, in terms of their popularity or success. Is it conceivable that something like 3D printing or even VR just won't happen?
I don't think so. And I'll give you maybe I'll try and make the case. So start with 3D printing. Is it the case that right now you can install some 3D printers and print out a brand new car? No. You can make a much longer list of things where it does not make any economic sense to produce them in general with 3D printing. But there are already lots of examples where it makes more economic sense to use 3D printing to, whether it's to produce the product in general or to produce the product in specific cases where you have a high value to responsiveness and it's expensive to have inventory. So if you look at Ford Motor Company's annual report from last year, so annual report for 2022, you'll find they reported making over 200,000 automotive parts via 3D printing. And it's well known that lots of companies are using 3D printers for MRO in their factory, replacement parts in their factories. And these are examples of places where it makes economic sense right now. And when that starts to happen, then what happens? Companies get better and better at using these technologies. There's a steep learning curve. So Andrew, I'm not arguing next year, everything that Amazon ships out is going to be 3D printed next year. We're not arguing that. But 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, the dominant trend, what is different from the past, is in that direction. And more things will become economically viable in that respect.
We're speaking with Robert C. Wolcott. I found you a utopian, and he is one, I think, in all the best senses of the world, really positively optimistic about the future, particularly the future of digital technology. He's the co-author of Proximity. I want to remind everyone that great guests like Rob are brought to us because of our friends at Liberty, excellent new quarterly of culture and politics, published in Washington, D.C. by Leon Wieseltier, my old friend. Going to run a short feature on liberties, and then we'll be back with Rob to talk more about Proximity and the future that he imagines, in which everything will be available immediately and will make a very happy world. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking with Robert C. Wolcott, the author, co-author of Proximity. Rob, one of the critiques, I think, and this won't come as a great surprise to the arguments you put forward about these coming breakthroughs that will create this wonderful new world, is what happens if all these new technologies are controlled by a tiny handful of enormously powerful companies. I know one of the technologies that you're optimistic about it, and you're not alone here, is generative AI. But of course, we're in the midst of that revolution, and it's controlled by 2 or 3 companies, OpenAI, Google, perhaps Microsoft. Is there a danger that if all these new technologies, 3D printing, generative AI, VR, if they all fall into the hands of a single company, that rather than a utopia, we'll have your dystopia? We remember in Brave New World, of course, this was a world controlled by Ford. In fact, the gods of Brave New World were called Ford, Ford.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And, I want to underscore, while I am optimistic about the longer term future for reasons we can discuss, and I've been saying this for a while, I think the next 30 years or so are going to be far more difficult than most people think. And since large language models have become so present, almost ubiquitous for the public in the past couple of years, I think this is starting to become tangible. And I'm very optimistic about what we can do to amplify the value that we can create, to be additive. As a friend just this week, Mark Kennedy from Imperial College London, articulated, additive AI is when we use AI to do things we actually couldn't have done before. So I'm very optimistic about those things. But of course, anytime there is a fundamental shift in economic value creation, there's a risk of the concentration within a relatively small number of organizations or human beings, societies, et cetera. And we just have to look back to the Industrial Revolution. We saw that writ large at the late 19th, early 20th century, and then the trust busting came through. Andrew, the economist Brian Arthur said a number of times that this becomes over time less of an economic problem and more of a social political problem. And I agree with that. So I think there's going to be an enormous amount of dislocation. Do I believe that automated vehicles are going to be real? Sure, absolutely. Is it a year from now? Probably not. 5 years, 10 years? At some point, we'll crack the code. And at that point, what happens to the hundreds of thousands of people just in the United States that make their money driving a truck? And you can raise a family driving a truck in the United States, make a pretty good living. That goes away at some point. So we're going to have enormous social dislocations. But in the long run, the opportunity is far beyond anything we've ever imagined.
You mentioned, Rob, that you like dystopian literature, or at least you read it. We talked about Brave New World, the classic 20th century dystopia, along with Orwell's 1984. Perhaps if there's a book that gets the award for 21st century dystopia, it's Kim Stanley Robinson's The Ministry for the Future, which is an environmental dystopia. I know that in your coverage of cultured meat and renewable energy, you believe that some of this stuff is going to be addressed. But can your revolution, this proximity revolution, can it really turn around what seems to be the inevitable progress, if that's the right word, of global warming?
Well, I can't say at what speed, and I can't say whether it'll be soon enough, but I do believe that humans will come together and figure out how to crack this code, because it becomes present and existential. And I reflect on, Andrew, one of the reasons I got into the whole field of innovation in the first place was in college being confronted by the work by Thomas Robert Malthus, Malthusian economics. And he made a compelling case. We know there are problems with it in retrospect, but he made a compelling case that sometime in the 19th century, the world was going to, society was going to collapse under the weight of its own demands and mass starvation and conflagration. And his argument was that food production increases arithmetically and population increases geometrically. So therefore, at some point, everything will fall apart. And guess what? Technology, largely hydrocarbons at the time, by the way, but technology intervened to figure that out. And I think distributed capabilities, proximity, is essential to solving this problem, because the more we can bring production to procrastinate until there's an actual demand where and when it's demanded, the less waste we can generate in the world. Now let me give you a counterpoint that we are experiencing right now. Part of the reason we know proximity is happening and going to happen is that we know the demand side. What is that? Human beings want what they want, where and when they want it. And it's always been like that. Now, what they want changes minute to minute, and it changes over time, of course. But people want what they want, where and when they want it. And we've got companies right now that are achieving a version of proximity through basically some 20th century means, like Temu, and is it Shine or Sheen? I never am sure how to say it. But you can order your sweater from some factory in China, and they will make that sweater and put it on a 777 cargo jet and fly it to you. Oh my gosh, what could be better? I get exactly the sweater I want, cheap. Well, meanwhile, that ain't so good for the future of the planet. So,
to put it mildly, right?
So we're showing that proximity is a powerful drive. So what we have to do is be smarter and better about doing it more economically viably in a way that's also sustainable. And those possibilities are there. And we talk about a number of them in the book.
It's interesting in the book, the subtitle of the book, Rob, is How Coming Breakthroughs in Just-in-Time Transform Business, Society, and Daily Life. What's lacking from that subtitle is politics. You noted early that the political issues surrounding dominant tech companies, big tech companies like OpenAI and Google are relevant.
Yeah.
But can proximity, can that change the way we do politics? America this weekend is going through another hysterical crisis over its political elites who have misbehaved and continue to misbehave. The government seems increasingly archaic. It's the opposite of your proximity revolution. In Washington, D.C., nothing ever gets done. Can proximity change politics?
Well, it's already having an impact, good and bad. But Let me point out, Andrew, that we had a whole bunch of things we wanted to put in the subtitle, but at some point we had to actually say it's not the book, it's the subtitle. But so we throw politics under society, and I would say that you're better positioned to talk about the influence of proximity and the digital technologies on political factors. But again, I mean, I keep going back to history because honestly, it's my favorite subject in the world. But when we look at history, we see when we change how we communicate, we change how we congregate. And we saw that writ large in the Protestant Reformation. As many of your listeners would know, there were plenty of schisms before Martin Luther popped up and nailed some theses on a church door. There were lots of successful ones, but only localized, like in Bohemia, and then there was a significant one in the UK. But they never really stretched beyond their home turf. Then the printing press showed up, and it was possible to throw those ideas all over the place. And it had a fundamental impact in the political dynamics, and ultimately leading to the 30 Years' War and many other things. So I think we're seeing this now with fake news. We're seeing this now with social media. Social media, I mean, if you were bored right now, Andrew, you could easily be looking at the social media and I wouldn't even know it.
Maybe I am.
Maybe you are. I don't know. That's a risk I take.
Or the baseball scores or the football scores. Yeah, but that's always the nature of things. But coming back, I think we're a little bit of the way there. We've done shows recently on the impact of the Seattle demonstrations against the World Trade Organization in '99, that with a sort of intellectual organizational foundations of the Occupy movement and Me Too and Black Lives Matter and even some of the more right-wing stuff. Are some of the immediate sort of political movements in which people are coming together and demanding change, even if they're not achieving it, like in the Arab Spring, might those be the early stages in political terms of your proximity revolution?
Yeah, it's an interesting observation, and I admit to not having thought that through much, but my initial reaction of it is these technologies allow us to congregate, as I mentioned before, in new configurations and to communicate with certain identified sets. And this, I think, has something to do with why we're having such a difficult time in the United States and many other parts of the world coming together the way that we used to. And by the way, I'm a passionate centrist, if that makes any sense. Some people would say that doesn't make any sense, but I'm a passionate centrist. I trend a little bit to the right, I have to admit. But I'm going to vote for whoever I think is the best.
You weren't demonstrating January 6th, I hope, Rob.
No. I didn't say I was crazy. I said that I trend a little bit to the right. In fact, I was sitting at home as aghast as anybody else watching that on TV. But the aftermath of all that, and I have family in many parts of the United States. I have family whom I love, whom I respect. They have extraordinary values as human beings. But some of these family and friends are, Andrew, convinced that the election was actually stolen. Now, all the evidence we have says it was not. All the forums in court where the burden of proof, where the bar of truth is far higher, say we didn't. Say it was a fair
it's interesting
election.
in that sense, because the media now is trying to do real-time analysis of what they see as Trump's lies. So recently in his speeches after the trial, the New York Times and CNN had analysts offering what you might call just-in-time critiques of what he said, saying, well, this is a lie, this isn't a lie, this is based on some delusion. Yeah. But it doesn't really make any difference because, as you say, some of your relatives just believe that the whole thing is fixed. They don't watch CNN. They don't read the New York Times. They're watching Fox or they're looking at the social media. So even if all this stuff is true, and when it comes to information technology, will that actually make any difference to how people think about the world?
Well, first of all, let's just accept that this is incredibly frustrating. I mean, we're not going to get around that. Second, the answer is not let's give up. I mean, we can't say let's just give it. We're never going to make any progress. Let's give up. we need to figure out how to come together. And I think there are some rays of hope. There have been some in the midst of some of the most divisive politics in the United States in the Congress since the 19th century. And this is not unprecedented, by the way. We have, over the past few years, been able to come together on some bipartisan legislation. And so that doesn't get reported about as much because it's not quite as exciting to watch real time. But I think, number one, those people that are feeling not much love in the middle, like myself, they're still out there.
The passionate
so we got to
centrists,
spend time with them. And then eventually people that are too far over the deep end, they might eventually come around and realize in some ways they were wrong. But getting them to stand up and say, oh my gosh, guess what? I was wrong. I think that's kind of a dead end. We've got to find other ways to come together on other issues. And then maybe in the long run, I hope in the long run, we'll find better paths forward.
Rob, you gave Netflix as an example, an early example of your proximity revolution, a place you can go and immediately get whatever movie you want. There are lots of other on-demand services online where you can do this. Does that mean there's no longer any scarcity? Or in this new world of, say, abundance of one kind or abundance or another, will there be new scarcities? When you think of Netflix, there's still the scarcity of good movies. There's still some degree of scarcity of bandwidth and the scarcity of our time. We can't watch Netflix more than 24 hours a day. So in this world of proximity, which in your view represents a kind of new scarcity and a new abundance, where everything is available immediately, what will be the new scarcities? Or will there be any scarcity at all?
That's a great question, and a number of reactions to it. First of all, the concept of abundance, I do concur with it, but I take a little bit of a different approach. And I've written about this a couple of times. So, thinking about like Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil and abundance.
And they've all been on the show.
I'm sure. Yeah. And I follow their thinking quite a bit, but I think about abundance somewhat differently. I call it anthropic abundance. Why is that? Because where we're pushing toward is driven in large, not exclusively, but in large part by human desire and human intention. And therefore we end up with more and more abundance of what we directly desire. And then either by implication, unintended consequences, or in some cases, intended consequences, other things become more scarce. Like we're seeing, for instance, Andrew, this collapse in species in the world, so many extinctions. This is a byproduct in many ways of human desire, which is driving anthropic abundance while driving down scarcity and other things. But to bring it closer to home with respect to proximity and products and services and things like this, I'd turn the question to thinking about value. What do humans, consumers, citizens, et cetera, value, and what do they want? And what do I mean by this? Before COVID, I was speaking with a friend of mine in Europe in the luxury goods industry. I was telling her all about proximity, and she was like, oh, this is interesting, but wait a minute, Rob. What about when, and she used this kind of made up example, which is kind of cute. She said, what about when one of our consumers wants to spend $5,000 on a handbag that was handmade by nuns in the Dolomites? Now, she's going to have to wait 6 months for that because it takes 6 months to make that stupid handbag. That's not proximity. And I said, well, you make a good point, but actually it is in the sense that she's not paying because she wants to wait. She's paying because to have the privilege to wait for that. And the value is in the story. The value is in the exclusivity of having that scarce item where she is paying for the privilege to wait for 6 months for the product. And that doesn't violate the proximity notion at all, because what we do not say is that all products and services will definitely be produced and provided. What we say is value will be produced and provided. And as I tell my students, my clients, my entrepreneurs I invest in, your customers don't care about your products and services. They care about the value they get. And if somebody can provide that better, faster, cheaper, et cetera, then eventually they're going to leave you. So I think it comes down to thinking about what do people actually value and how do we get that to them? And then hopefully, and you talk a lot about this, is why I love a lot of your work, is how do we do it mindfully? How do we have mechanisms to argue before it's a problem in advance and say, what are the implications of this for society, for the planet, for maybe other species, et cetera? Frankly, Andrew, most people, I hate to say it, most people aren't going to spend much time on that. But that is incumbent on as many of us as possible to confront these issues, take these stands before they're really existential.
It's interesting you talk about taking time on it, and your example of the expensive handbag being handmade in the Dolomites. I wonder in the future, if your revolution really happens, whether value will come out of slow movements. We already have the slow food movement. That people will get pleasure. There'll be if everything is on demand, then the real value will be the opposite. So people will take pleasure in waiting 6 months for a new product. It reminds me of the vinyl revolution in music. I mean, in the 90s, MP3 revolutionized technology, did away with the CD, made all music accessible immediately, and now more vinyl LPs, which are profoundly inefficient and expensive, they outsell CDs. So won't that be the future, that in a way privilege will go not with immediacy but with time?
Well, but you make a great point, but it'll be a choice. People will be able to make that choice, and it'll be based on the value they desire. So someone who decides to buy vinyl, or let's say collect vinyl, is doing that for a different set of purposes than downloading from Spotify. Now, streaming on Spotify or using vinyl, you still get to experience music, but you're making a different social statement. You're entering different social circles. You're doing you have a different form factor and physical, emotional experience, depending on whether you care about the fact that it's a vinyl and you get to place it on the palette and listen to it. So what proximity does not say is that absolutely everything will be. Instead, we say that value will be created and produced closer and closer to the moment of demand. And the value is up to understanding what consumers, or what we as humans, really want.
Finally, Rob, a lot of people are going to be interested in this. They're going to get the book. I know you have an event that just happened in Chicago, Proximity, and you have a network, the Twin Global, the World Innovation Network. How can people work with you in terms of understanding this and perhaps join your network? Great.
Well, number one, I'm always on LinkedIn. Reach out, and please say, hey, we met on Keen On, because obviously I can only see Andrew on the screen. So give me that cue. I'm happy to connect and have a conversation. In terms of the World Innovation Network, go to twinglobal.org. It's not a business. We don't have a business model. We just get together sometimes and talk about the future. And to be honest, for me, it's just to keep great people together. When I meet somebody really interesting, that seems to have a good ethical compass and is trying to envision and create the future, I want a way to reconnect with them on a regular basis. So that's really what Twin is.
Can I step on the scene? I'm ready to attack. Andrew Keen. Yeah, he's the one to bash. Asking questions, no filter, just keeps on grinning. He's the man who's got the whole crowd spinning. Money, fame, success, it's all in his sight. He'll dig deep, expose you with all his might. No sugarcoating, he'll cut right through. Andrew Keen, he's the one to spew. Yeah, he's an expert.